Hello and welcome to my library. It's filled with curious, dark and mysterious tales. Money, the root of all evil, or so they say. How far would you go for it? Would you sell your soul to the devil? Would you take someone's life? Well, in today's story, we follow that of a sorceress extraordinaire whose quest for riches ends with a plot to kill a king. Now our story takes us to France in the 1600s. King Louis XIV is on the throne and France was gripped with fear about poison. Now you see, there'd been a string of rather suspicious deaths. The first was Princess Henrietta of England, who after a long day of being royalty, which I'm sure is very hard, mind you, she was served a lovely glass of iced chicory water. She began to drink it. She cried out in pain, clutching her side, exclaiming that she had been poisoned. The next day, at 2 o'clock in the morning, poor Henrietta was dead. Now, modern medical consensus is that she died of natural causes, but where's the fun in that? The next was the Foreign Affairs Minister. It's thought that his wife probably had him killed, and you know what? I do not blame her, because he, at one point in their relationship, had her arrested and shipped off to a convent. The next was a count called Eugene Maurice, who had a mysterious sudden seizure and was dead within 3 days. His cousin died a few years later, within hours of, you guessed it, drinking a lovely iced beverage. Common theme here. So you never knew who wanted you dead. It could be your husband, your daughter, even your own mother. So you have to really watch your back. You're leaving your drink unattended. I'm watching you, so you don't try anything funny. The poison of the day was arsenic, known by some as inheritance powder. Now this was odourless, it was tasteless, and so it made it practically child's play to get away with murder. If you were clever, you could gradually poison your victim, and nobody would suspect a thing. So now we've set the scene a little bit, it's time to introduce you to the star of the show, and she is no other than Catherine de Chaise, also known as La Voisin. Now, not much is known about her early life, though it's thought that she likely grew up in poverty. However, she was very resourceful, and she started selling fortunes to passers-by at the age of 9. She had a real knack for this whole fortune-telling thing, because apparently quite a few of her fortunes actually came true. She married jeweller and silk merchant Antoine Montvoisin in her 20s, and her nickname comes from her married name, La Voisin. Unfortunately, her husband proved to be quite unreliable and his businesses started to fail. Understandably, she did not want to fall back into poverty, and so she had to find a way to support all of her family. She needed to support herself, her husband, she had at least 3 children, and she needed to support her mother as well. And this need for money sent her on a slippery slope into crime and the dark arts. Now, the first step on this descent wasn't all that bad. She started providing for her family with her fortune-telling skills using palmistry and also astrology. She gave marriage advice, sometimes on how to escape them, advice to curry favour at court, to capture hearts, the list goes on. Now, as she started to make a bit more money, she wanted to give herself more of an aura of authenticity, and this would help her to, attract all of the elite clientele. So she commissioned the most beautiful robe of crimson red velvet. It was embroidered with 200 golden eagles. It was very intricate, and she called this her emperor's robe. She even had a pair of matching slippers. A woman of taste. Now, just as things were going well for La Voisin, the church got involved. And they were not happy. She was sent to the Sorbonne University for questioning. However, La Voisin, she was clever, she knew how to read people, and she was persuasive. So instead of being charged with heresy, she managed to convince a tribunal that was made up of vicars and doctors of theology that her methods of fortune-telling were completely in line with the church's ideals. And this was an unexpected boon for her business. Her business now appeared to have the church's blessing, and so people from all echelons of society flocked to her for her services. She was rich, she was famous, and living a life of luxury. Now, La Voisin had an unshakable faith in her abilities. "Nothing is impossible to me," she remarked to one of her clients. "Only another god can understand my powers." She thought her powers were given to her by God. I guess it's good to have faith in yourself. She started to offer various lotions and potions. Her love powder was particularly popular, and this was made from the bones of toads, teeth of moles, Spanish fly, iron filings, human blood. Mwah! Delicious, I'm sure. The next step on this descent wasn't so bad either. She started providing services as a midwife. But she wanted even more money, and so she started offering abortions. Now, abortions were illegal, like super illegal and punishable by death. It's thought that she performed these abortions in her garden pavilion, and that the remains from these abortions were buried in her back garden or sometimes burnt in a small furnace that was hidden by a little tapestry. Spurred on either by want for more money or perhaps increasing demand from her clients, La Voisin's services took an even darker turn. The next step on this descent was one of her most expensive offerings, the Black Mass. These were performed in the catacombs beneath her home by priests, some of which were her lovers, others had debts to settle. And this Black Mass, it was salacious, it was thoroughly scandalous. A naked woman would lie down acting as an altar, a black candle in each hand and a golden chalice resting on their stomach. Now the next bit is a little bit harrowing, I warn you. A priest would perform satanic rites over her body before spilling the blood of a newborn into the chalice. And it's thought that these sacrificial victims were sourced from La Voisin's work as a midwife abortionist. Now, many of the women at court were vying for the king's attention. They all wanted the exalted position of official mistress. Now, being an official mistress was actually quite a big deal. They were often one of the most powerful people in the king's court. And one such woman that wanted this position was Madame de Montespan. And purportedly, she came to La Voisin and asked her to perform a black mass so that she could help to win the king's heart. And you know what? It seemed to work. That same year, the king fell for her charms and she became the official mistress. Though she was known for her absolutely outstanding beauty and razor-sharp wit, which maybe had a little part to play. I don't know. The king was never a faithful man. His eyes always wandered. I mean, he was a king, he probably had women throwing themselves at him left, right and centre. Anyway, Madame de Montespan supposedly procured various aphrodisiacs from her to slip into the king's drink when he appeared to be losing interest in her. Now, unfortunately for La Voisin, her husband was a really vicious drunk and he treated her terribly. And so, rightly or wrongly, she apparently tried to kill him a number of times. But she was never successful. She had to be very careful because her husband was very good friends with the public executioner, and he said that he'd be on the lookout for any foul play if, her husband were to suddenly drop dead. Despite her unhappy marriage, she took some solace in alcohol and affairs, and there must have been something quite alluring about La Voisin because she had many lovers over the years. They ranged from aristocracy to magicians, alchemists, priests, the list goes on. And some of them even vowed to marry her if her husband were to die. And so this might be another reason why she wanted her husband dead. It was around this time that the affair of the poisons had started to begin, and this launched an investigation by the chief of police to root out all poisoners. Now, this whole affair was sparked by poisoner Madame de Brinvilliers. She was in her 40s, she was slender with beautiful big blue eyes, very innocent looking, definitely a wolf in sheep's clothing. And she poisoned her father and 2 brothers, and then administered poison to her eldest daughter and her husband, but she later regretted this and quickly gave them the antidote. And this all resulted in her being arrested and being sentenced to be hung and her body to be burned. This scandal dominated all conversation. Even though France was currently waging war on the Dutch, it was all anyone could talk about. And this was emphasised by the fact that 100,000 people turned out to watch this lady burn. Whilst on trial, she had remarked that half people I know, people of quality, are involved in this kind of thing. And La Voisin, she was one of these people. She began to get involved in the world of supplying poisons. A lot of women wanted their husbands dead, and so this was a very lucrative job. She managed to amass an impressive network of apothecaries to supply all these poisons to her clients, many of whom were high-standing ladies at court. Now, La Voisin was not the only purveyor of these kinds of services. She had some competition, and Le Boss was her biggest rival. She was another sorceress extraordinaire. They had once worked in partnership, but they fought over money, of course, and now they were sworn enemies. Now, this Le Boss woman did not know when to keep her mouth shut, and whilst at a very lavish dinner party, she got a little bit tipsy, and she started to boast about how her business was flourishing, and that once she had poisoned 3 more people, she would be able to retire. Very, very silly. And so, of course, one of the attendees of this party reported this to the police, and then Le Boss and one of her accomplices were subsequently arrested, and these 2 started implicating a whole load of very important women as their clients. and of course they mentioned Le Voisin, and they said that she was at the centre of this whole poison scandal. So on the 12th of March 1679, Le Voisin had just finished attending mass at her parish church. She wasn't suspecting a thing, la la la, when suddenly she was descended upon by the police and she was arrested. The fierce interrogation began. Le Voisin, of course, claimed that she was innocent. She pointed the finger at Le Boss, and Le Boss pointed the finger at her, and they flung accusations back and forth at each other. Le Boss claimed that countless aborted infants could be found in Le Voisin's garden and implicated her in a number of poisonings. Le Voisin's interrogators knew that she had a weakness for alcohol, and so they tried to ply her with this to get her to talk. And eventually Le Voisin did admit to some of the allegations against her. She confirmed that, along with her expert abortionist, they had carried out over 10,000 abortions. Under questioning, Le Voisin stated, in relation to the prevalence of poisoning, "Paris is full of this kind of thing, and there is an infinite number of people engaged in this evil trade. A great number of persons of every sort of rank and condition address themselves to me to seek death or to find the means to kill many people." On the 17th of February 1680, Le Voisin was put on trial, and she was found guilty of witchcraft. She was sentenced to be burned alive. Now, before her execution, she was subjected to intense interrogation, and this spanned for 3 days, and then this culminated with her being tortured. On the 22nd of February 1680, she was carted off to the execution site. She put up a really good fight. They had to drag her from the cart, kicking and screaming. And when she was chained to the stake, she kicked away the hay that was heaped upon her in desperation. However, the flames soon consumed her, and it was remarked that she had passed from the midst of one flame into another. So, what about this plot to kill the king, I hear you ask? Well, after Le Voisin's death, her daughter Marie was arrested, and she had a number of cutting accusations to make. Remember I said that the king had a wandering eye? He started an affair with another woman, and this enraged Madame de Montespan. If she could not have the king, then she wanted him and his lover dead. So apparently, she went to Le Voisin to ask for her help. But Le Voisin was very sensible, she wasn't having any of it. But Madame de Montespan wouldn't take no for an answer, and she managed to convince Le Voisin with a very, very handsome sum of money. So the first plan was to present the king with a poisoned petition, and the second part of the plan was to have someone pose as a silk merchant and approach the king's mistress. They would then offer her a beautiful piece of cloth that was laced with poison, which would kill her if she wore it. If the cloth was not to her liking, they would also bring some exquisite gloves that she would not be able to resist, also quoted in Poison. The idea was that once the poison had killed the king's mistress, the king would have succumbed to the fumes from Le Voisin's petition. Now, Le Voisin never did succeed in giving this petition to the king, and her husband was really confused as to why she was so obsessed with handing over the petition. She had once remarked to her husband that she must achieve her objective or perish in the attempt, to which her husband exclaimed, "What? Perish? It's a bit much for a piece of paper." But he didn't know what evil plan she had cooking. The next plan was even stupider than the first. It was to have someone throw themselves in front of the king as he was passing by, and then, whilst clasping at his knees in seeming supplication, they would slip some poison into his pocket, which would kill the king the next time he used his handkerchief. Now, I don't think any of these plans would have worked, and we also won't know if any of these accusations are true, because King Louis sought to obliterate any evidence that would implicate Madame de Montespan. He had them burned. And all the people that corroborated these accusations, well, they did so under torture, so how much they can be believed is not known. This whole affair of the poisons was very far-reaching. 218 people were arrested, 36 were executed, and 23 were exiled. And so ends our tale of Le Voisin, a sorceress extraordinaire, a poisoner, a woman of humble beginnings who brought a royal court into chaos. Stay safe, don't leave your drink unattended, and I hope you have a magnificent day.